Hello, my name is Dr. Robert Townsend, PhD. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, USA. I've been a independent neurobiochemistry researcher and author since 2001. I've been a mental health practitioner and specialist since 1975. I own and operate a private mental health clinic since 1997. I'm here to tell you about the world's first long-term methylphenidate Ritalin treatment for Parkinson's illnesses. The information in this presentation is from a research article that I wrote and submitted to the Journal of Neuro and Oncology Research. They printed it in September, on September 24, 2022. It's a 38-page research paper with a case study in it as well. And in January of 2023, the publishers sent me an award as Best Author of 2022, and that's an Excellence Award for my research and writings of the article that this presentation centers around. From the article that I was awarded, the Excellence Award, I wrote two more articles. One is called Biochemistry of Methylphenidate in Long-Term Treatment of Parkinson's, and it focuses on the technical aspects of the biochemistry of methylphenidate for Parkinson's illnesses. Leaves the case study to the side, and the third article is called Methylphenidate Superior Efficacy Dosing Schedule, a 3-hour schedule for immediate release tablets and 6-hour schedule for extended release capsules. This takes some of the technical aspects of methylphenidate from the Parkinson's treatment research and applies some of those technical aspects to general uses of methylphenidate, and shows that you get a better and safer result by administering methylphenidate every 3 hours instead of the traditional 4 hours. There are over 10 million people worldwide who have Parkinson's disorders. The majority of them are disabled by Parkinson's or will become disabled. The disorder causes significant difficulties for household members and community support providers. The difficulties affect over 490 million people worldwide. Parkinson's disorders worsen across time. The worsening occurs faster as the disorders grow more severe. Anti-Parkinsonian medications are used to control Parkinson's symptoms. Anti-Parkinsonian dose amounts increase when symptoms grow worse. Anti-Parkinsonians have side effects that become more severe when dose amounts increase. Augmentation is a process in anti-Parkinsonians that damages neural tissues and neural systems. Augmentation adds to the natural worsening of the disorders and makes the worsening occur faster. Augmentation and side effects are severe in high doses of anti-Parkinsonians. Anti-Parkinsonians are disabling at high dose amounts that control advanced Parkinson's symptoms. Parkinson's-related symptoms primarily result from structurally weak and underproductive dopamine systems. The structural weakness is progressive as a function of the illness. Progressive weakness makes dopamine systems highly vulnerable to anti-Parkinsonian-induced augmentation. The part of the brain most affected by dopamine depletion is the striatum. Dopamine replacement therapy enhances dorsal striatum motor functions, but dopamine replacement therapy simultaneously overdoses ventral striatum receptors with dopamine, impairing their functions of cognition, mental acuity, and alertness. Published literature promotes the benefits of antiparkinsonians without explaining the abnormal absorption of antiparkinsonian-induced dopamine by dorsal and ventral receptors. Antiparkinsonian-induced dopamine interacts differently than natural dopamine. This shows a chemical molecular difference between natural and antiparkinsonian-induced dopamine. An analysis of over 400 published articles found nothing that chemically differentiated natural versus antiparkinsonian dopamine. The differences are self-evident, but they're omitted from published literature. The goals of antiparkinsonian dopamine replacement therapy are to increase a patient's dopamine levels, to relieve Parkinson's symptoms, and to improve general functioning. But the abnormal absorption of antiparkinsonian-induced dopamine disallows the goals. Increased doses of antiparkinsonians usually decrease general functioning. High doses often disable general functioning, and dopamine replacement therapy causes harmful augmentation. The research subject who conceived and designed this research program experienced many adverse effects from antiparkinsonians, including syncope, sudden blackouts, and passing out without warning. He experienced shortness of breath, odd breathing, and hoarseness. He had tremors and twitching, hypotension, low blood pressure, increased urinary frequency and incontinence, nausea, weight gain, memory impairment, decreased mental acuity, and fatigue. His neurologist added pramipexole to restrict carbidopa augmentation. Carbidopa is carbidopa levodopa, the most common medication for Parkinson's diseases. But pramipexole did not restrict augmentation. His neurologist increased the dose on 2 occasions, trying to get the augmentation down, but the first increase led to multiple bouts of narcolepsy and an ambulance ride to emergency care for narcoleptic blackouts. This is a part of the emergency room doctor's notes. It shows the paramedics and EMS staff brought the subject to the emergency room for sudden passing out. The neurologist reacted to emergency care by prescribing the second increase of pramipexole. The increase caused a year of higher frequency narcolepsy and a steady decline of ability to function. The increase worsened the illness and caused total disability after a year on the higher dose. Pramipexole marketing tells providers that pramipexole restricts augmentation, but research shows that it does not. The pramipexole product monograph contains 28 warnings about pramipexole-induced narcolepsy. Pramipexole does not control or reduce carbidopa augmentation. Pramipexole causes the same rate of augmentation as carbidopa. The neurology community has nothing that controls or stops augmentation and other adverse effects from antiparkinsonians. A solution was sought by using deep brain stimulation, but DBS, deep brain stimulation, has all of the dangers inherent to brain surgery. DBS also does not improve speech, it does not improve cognition, which is the number one factor in general functioning, does not improve swallowing, it does not improve freezing gait, and it does not inhibit illness progression. Deep brain stimulation has an overly narrow range of potential benefits. It has too much history of significant brain damage. Therefore, practitioners rely on dopamine replacement therapy for long-term management of Parkinson's-related disorders. Physicians will tell their patients that the disorder will grow worse over time. Medication augmentation makes the disorder worse. Medications increase as the disorder worsens, and high-dose side effects will cause disability in addition to disability from the disorder. The physicians say that the patient is free to stop or decrease the medications at any time the patient wishes, but the physicians also say that when a person who uses anti-Parkinsonians becomes disabled, anti-Parkinsonians cannot stop the disability. There's no way to overcome Parkinson's and anti-Parkinsonian disability. Despite their side effects, anti-Parkinsonians must continue in order to control the harsh symptoms caused by the disability. Total disability came to our research subject at age 58 after 35 years of very severe Parkinsonism, 9 years of dopamine replacement therapy augmentation, and anti-Parkinsonians that increased from 1 milligram to 2,061 milligrams per day. As neurologists said, medical science had nothing that could stop or prevent or overcome this type of disability. The research subject searched through medical literature for hundreds of hours looking for answers that didn't exist. On the afternoon that he became disabled, the afternoon when the disability struck him down, he could no longer function, he thought of a new idea that wasn't in medical literature and no one had previously conceived of or tried. He thought of Ritalin as it could overcome narcolepsy, therefore it might overcome Parkinson's narcolepsy combined with narcoleptic effects of high-dose anti-Parkinsonians. He got an emergency visit with a doctor and received a trial of 5 milligram tabs of Ritalin to find the right dose if it helped. He tried 5 milligrams, then 10, then 20 milligrams, and he discovered that 30 milligrams of Ritalin overcame anti-Parkinsonian narcolepsy and cognitive impairment. He soon discovered that without taking anti-Parkinsonians, 20 milligrams of Ritalin stopped anti-Parkinsonian narcolepsy, cognitive impairment, and motor symptoms. It did everything that anti-Parkinsonians do, but without anti-Parkinsonians, there were not the side effects and long-term disability effects that anti-Parkinsonians bring. This was the start of the world's first long-term methylphenidate or Ritalin treatment of Parkinson's. This graph shows the progression of the dose amounts of anti-Parkinsonians that our research subject went through. Down at the bottom left, shows 1 milligram, 2 milligrams. That was when medication started in 2005, and the medications increased 112 milligrams, 750 milligrams, 936, 1,621 milligrams, and that's when the ambulance took the research subject to the emergency room for passing out after taking anti-Parkinsonians. As neurologists reacted to the emergency room admission by increasing anti-Parkinsonians again by 21%. Patient became disabled by a year of anti-Parkinsonians at that high dose of 2,061 milligrams per day. His disability ended a week after he started methylphenidate. At the bottom part of this graph, you see where methylphenidate started at 5 milligrams and gradually increased, went up to 10 milligrams, 30 milligrams, 40 milligrams, and went up higher amounts over time, and as it increased, anti-Parkinsonians decreased in the amount that was used every day. Anti-Parkinsonians decreased to 0 milligrams during 16-hour days and reduced to 470 milligrams at bedtime only. Methylphenidate increased to 105 milligrams per day, not because that was what it took to control symptoms, but that was the amount that sequential doses added up to in order to extend the efficacy duration of methylphenidate so it would last for 16 hours per day. Our research subject's disability terminated a week after starting methylphenidate. As he was medical history's first and only person to overcome Parkinson's total disability. The disability never came back because methylphenidate strengthens and protects neural tissues and systems. 16-hour diurnal methylphenidate replaced diurnal anti-Parkinsonians for the next 9 years and continues into the future because it works. This is a table that shows the increasing doses of methylphenidate over time, and again the doses increased mainly to extend efficacy to longer periods of time. It was found that it could control Parkinson's symptoms at 20 milligrams, 30 milligrams, and then more doses were added sequentially from there to get 16 hours of coverage per day. While methylphenidate came into use in 2014, at first the daily amount of dopamine replacement therapy was 2,061 milligrams per day, and in 2020 the amount of dopamine replacement therapy had dropped to 470 milligrams per day, taken at bedtime only. This was a reduction of 78% less anti-Parkinsonians, and 470 milligrams was only 22% of the previous daily total. Our case subject was the first person to discover and use adjunctive methylphenidate for counteracting the adverse effects of high-dose anti-Parkinsonians. He was the first person to discover and use 16-hour methylphenidate as the replacement of all daytime anti-Parkinsonians. He was the first to discover that daily 16-hour methylphenidate monotherapy was significantly more effective and safer than daytime anti-Parkinsonians. He also was the first to discover that 3-hour methylphenidate dosing was significantly more effective and safer than traditional 4-hour dosing. This graph shows a 3 times per day 20 milligram regimen of methylphenidate. The red horizontal line across the middle of the graph represents the efficacy threshold for serum concentration of methylphenidate, and you can see that in taking 3 doses per day at every 4 hours, the efficacy of the medication drops below the efficacy threshold at hour 3 and remains below the efficacy threshold for 2 hours until hour 5. After the next peak, the efficacy drops to below the threshold again 1 hour for 1 hour, from hour 7.75 to hour 8.75. So with 3 doses per day at every 4 hours, the efficacy drops below the threshold 2 times during the day. Once is for 2 hours, the other is for an hour. this graph of Ritalin from the Ritalin LA product monograph gives a simpler, easier to understand version of the same thing in the previous diagram. The red line across the center in the horizontal position represents the efficacy threshold for methylphenidate, and the top graph shows methylphenidate every 4 hours at 2 times per day. It shows the efficacy drop below the threshold for an hour and 45 minutes, and when the doses are moved closer together so that Ritalin is taken every 3 hours, the efficacy does not drop below the threshold. Here we have another graph of methylphenidate 3 times per day from a different study. It again shows the efficacy dropping below the threshold 2 times during a 3 tablet admission during the day. And the top graph and the bottom graph shows the dosing moved to every 3 hours instead of every 4, and the dropping below the efficacy threshold goes away. There are no studies, there's no research, there's no literature available that shows methylphenidate being administered every 3 hours. It's traditional to do it every 4 hours, and that's what the research community locked into, and there is simply no research out there for taking methylphenidate every 3 hours. This research study was the first that used this design of every 3 hours. I did find a single study that didn't use methylphenidate every 3 hours throughout the day, but what it did was it gave the second dose of the day at 3 hours. And you can see that in the upper left, where the dip of efficacy does not go to or below the efficacy threshold. It's where the second dose was given at 3 hours, and that sustained the efficacy, and it continued to be effective. And the next dose was not given after 3 hours. Dose 2 was given after 4 hours. So if you follow the graph upward, you see it reach a peak and start dipping down, and when the second dose is administered at hour 7, that's 4 hours after the first, 4 hours after the second dose, the third dose brings the efficacy back up again. So this this graph shows a combination of 3-hour dosing and 4-hour dosing. The interest for this research study is 3-hour dosing. If the first 6 hours of the combined study, if the first 6 hours was separated from the rest, it gives a graph that represents a 3-hour dosing and a 6-hour time. Shows what happens when the second dose is at 3 hours, and it shows where the serum concentration is 3 hours later at hour 6. At the bottom graph, the doses, dose 3 is simulated to be moved to hour 6. When that simulated move was made, see that the dip of the upper graph, the dip at 7 hours, goes away, and the efficacy remains steady throughout the regimen up to hour 9, and that's what was hypothesized by this research study. This graph is based on an empirical study, and when the data was moved over to a 3-hour position for the second dose, the dip in efficacy went away by giving the medication at 3 hours rather than the traditional 4 hours. This graph shows the regimen that was developed for our research subject during the course of this research study. The intent was to find a regimen that would keep the efficacy above the threshold throughout the duration of daily administration. And this, by administering 25 milligrams first thing in the morning, and then administering a time release Methylphenidate CD 40 milligram capsule at hour 3, the efficacy didn't drop below the threshold. The 3-hour dose of Methylphenidate CD brought the efficacy up instead of allowing it to drop, and the 6-hour medication, it kept the efficacy well above the threshold, and when another dose of 20 milligram immediate release Ritalin was given 6 hours after the Methylphenidate CD was taken, the dose of Ritalin, the 20 milligrams, kept the dose, kept the efficacy level strong, and when another dose of IR Ritalin was given 3 hours after that, it still kept the efficacy above the efficacy threshold. Now, in the center of this graph, I inserted a graph of Acta XR 100 milligrams. It's a new development in methylphenidate. It's a one-time-a-day pill that lasts for 16 hours, and it sounds like it would be a grand replacement for what our research subject was using. However, when you look at the Acta XR graph, again, the red line, the red horizontal line, represents the efficacy threshold, and with 100 milligram Acta XR, there is a point after administration that efficacy drops below the efficacy threshold for a long period of time, and then it rebounds back above the threshold. But the problem is it drops below the threshold for a long period of time, and that is not useful, that is not beneficial for treating Parkinson's symptoms. For ADD or ADHD, it's not that major of an issue, although many patients who experience it complain that methylphenidate is a roller coaster of coming and going symptoms. But with Parkinsonian symptoms, it's very difficult because the symptoms return when the efficacy level drops below the threshold. It's not acceptable. So another regimen that's shown in this graph was developed over time that keeps the efficacy above the threshold throughout a 16 hour was what we were hoping for, 16-hour duration every day, and they can keep the efficacy above the threshold, perhaps for 17 hours on some days. The drug manufacturer writes in the product monograph since 1955 that 60 milligrams per day is the daily limit for Ritalin. Most clinicians adhere to that 60 milligram per day limit because the monograph never admitted that the manufacturer didn't conduct research above 60 milligrams. In 2017, two medical directors from the manufacturer of Ritalin, Novartis, two medical directors, an advisor, and 3 employees authored a literature review that espoused an open-ended approach to dose amounts. The authors firmly contradicted the Novartis 60 milligram limit. They presented limit guidelines and open-ended approaches from 9 countries around the world. The top one on this table, the United States, where maximum benefit was the deciding factor. No presumed amount, but rather patient response was what was sought. And under that, we have Great Britain showing a guideline approval of 100 milligrams per day. Under that, Canada was aiming for an optimal treatment dose, not for a specific limit. New Zealand also opted for a treatment dose response, not a specific number of milligrams as a limit. Malaysia stayed behind at the 60 milligram limit, out of date. That's Malaysia. Well, in England and Wales, 100 milligrams per day was approved, and in Sweden, 80 milligrams per day was approved. Those are all very different than the 60 milligrams per day that the manufacturer told the FDA back in 1955 and has been telling clinicians ever since 1955. But it's a false limit. There was no research above 60 milligrams to validate that limit. Canada has been approving 100 milligrams per day since before 2010. In 2020, they affirmed it again for 100 milligrams per day. And at the bottom of this screen, on the left and right, we see graphs that represent 100 milligrams of Adhancia XR. In Canada, it has a different brand name, Foquest. Canada approved 100 milligrams of Foquest per day in 2019. The manufacturer submitted the same research to the FDA. The FDA approved 85 milligrams per day based on the same research that wrote about 100 milligrams per day that Canada approved. The FDA approved 85. That was significantly above the 60 milligrams that so many clinicians are convinced is gospel since 1955. It is not gospel. The manufacturer just keeps repeating it, so it seems like it's gospel. Now, numerous studies in adults have shown there's no indication that use of oral methylphenidate in medically ill populations leads to problems of abuse. Many clinicians claim that they're afraid that their patients will abuse methylphenidate, but among adults with medical prescriptions, there is no indication that that occurs. It's a prejudice on the part of clinicians. Methylphenidate is a dopamine agonist, that acts by inhibiting presynaptic dopamine transporters, leading to suppression of dopamine reuptake. Due to reuptake suppression, more dopamine remains in the synapse. Methylphenidate retained dopamine is pure and natural dopamine that the healthy person normally produces. This naturally produced dopamine is processed in a healthy manner by normal synaptic activity. Anti-Parkinsonians induce chemically impure dopamine that disrupts normal synaptic functions, damages and destroys neural tissues and systems, and reduces dopamine in the brain. Insufficient and impure dopamine also disrupts the circadian balance, where dopamine reduces thyroid hormones during waking hours, and thyroid hormones circulate in greater volumes during sleep. That's the normal cycle. But anti-Parkinsonians disrupt that cycle. When the circadian balance fails, excess thyroid hormones block the flow of thyroid hormones. Blockage hormones die by apoptosis to allow transport cells to carry the dead thyroid hormones out of the way. The transport cells are formed of dopamine. Insufficient dopamine cannot form enough transport cells, so immobile dead thyroid cells decompose into acids that seep through the blood-brain barrier and destroy neural tissues and systems. The circadian problem is initiated by toxins in anti-Parkinsonians. It can be prevented by using diurnal methylphenidate instead of diurnal anti-Parkinsonians. So, I'm ending today's presentation by again pointing out that methylphenidate terminated the research subject's total disability in 1 week and reduced his day and evening anti-Parkinsonians to 0 milligrams, and reduced his total anti-Parkinsonians of a day by 78%, and reduces anti-Parkinsonians from 2,061 milligrams per day to 470 milligrams taken only at bedtime. Methylphenidate controls motor symptoms without causing augmentation or narcolepsy. Methylphenidate facilitates the circadian thyroid balance. It facilitates normal cognitive functions, alertness, and mental acuity. Ritalin 105 milligrams was our research subject's optimal amount per day. His optimal daily amount consisted of 20 milligrams per dose. 20 milligrams per dose is the most common and widely used dose size for adult ADD and ADHD. 20 milligrams per dose. Our research subject used 5 sequential doses per day for a consistent 16-hour efficacy. A 20 milligram dose was taken every 3 hours without loss of efficacy during transitions between doses. As opposed to widespread prejudice against methylphenidate, numerous studies in adults have found that there is no indication that the use of oral methylphenidate in medically ill populations leads to problems of abuse. Methylphenidate is not a typical, what they call stimulant. It operates in a different manner than Adderall or cocaine or anything like that. It's very different. It does not have abuse tied to it when it's prescribed to medically ill adults. The information that I presented today is from an article that I wrote about methylphenidate monotherapy for Parkinson's. The publisher of that article awarded me a Best Author of 2022 Excellence Award for the research and for the writing of the article. And I'm scheduled currently to present this method of treatment and to present a new method of treatment for bipolar disorders, to do both presentations to 7 science conferences and health conferences between now and May of 2024. Now, for the benefit of your Parkinson's and Parkinson's-related patients and their families, and for their better futures, I sincerely encourage you to study and implement the method of Parkinson's treatment that I presented today. This new method is assuredly and beyond doubt medical history's best and most effective treatment for Parkinson's and Parkinson's-related illnesses. I presented 3 articles today that were published in 2022 and 23 regarding a 2014 through 2022 Parkinson's research program. The global importance of this new method is recognized and acknowledged by the research publisher's Best Author 2022 Excellence Award. PDFs of the journal's full-length articles can be downloaded for free by browser searches with my name and the title of an article. One search could be done with my name and the article title, Long-Term Methylphenidate Monotherapy for Parkinson's, Biochemistry Analysis and 17-year case study. And another of the 3 articles can be brought up, can be downloaded for free by entering my name, Robert W. Townsend, and the title of the article, which is Biochemistry of Methylphenidate in Long-Term Treatment of Parkinson's. And the third of the 3 articles on this subject, enter my name again, Robert W. Townsend. The name of the article is Methylphenidate Superior Efficacy Dosing Schedule, 3-hour schedule for immediate release tablets and 6-hour schedule for extended release capsules. So I'm going to leave this information on your screen for a couple of minutes so that you can write it down. And I want to thank you sincerely for being here. I enjoyed being here with you, and thank you for listening. Have a good day. Farewell.